Hello, everybody. This is Carol Maletta. Welcome to the Parenting 411 podcast, where we share information parents need from sources they can trust. Welcome. Today, we'll be tackling one of the most pressing concerns for parents today, the soaring cost of college. As the years go by, families are increasingly struggling to finance their children's education, whether due to inadequate savings or sudden financial setbacks like layoffs or the pandemic crisis. But fear not. We are joined today by Brad Baldridge, an expert in college financial planning. As a financial expert, blogger, and host of the Taming the High Cost of College podcast, Brad has been sharing his college planning insights with clients, subscribers, and listeners for nearly 20 years. Today is no different, as he is ready to give you some proven strategies to help parents prepare for the expenses of higher education, from maximizing financial aid to choosing the right savings plan. Brad has helped countless families navigate the complexities of college finance and to avoid the pitfalls that can derail their plans. So whether you're a parent who's just starting to save for college or one who's already feeling the crunch, you really won't want to miss this conversation. Settle in and get ready to learn how to take control of your college costs and give your children the best possible start in life. So thank you so much for joining me today, Brad Baldridge.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes. So I was curious, how did you get started, specializing in helping families with college funding? Was that always an interest of yours and you started out with that specialty right away?
No, I'm a financial advisor by training. So I've been a financial advisor since 95, I think it is, or 96. And about 2005, so about 10 years in, I started realizing that college was becoming a bigger piece of the puzzle as it got more expensive and more questions were coming up and should we save and all that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I started kind of diving into it and trying to educate myself. And then I realized that there's a lot of strategies that families could use and a lot of things you need to understand and a lot of moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
So I started, giving more talks about it and that type of thing. And people listened and were asking more questions. So kind of snowballed from there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To where then eventually I launched a podcast, and I now have a specialty in college planning specifically, as well as general financial planning. So again, it's a big need out there, and the more I got involved, the more I realized that it's a need that's not being filled.
Yes, you are absolutely right. It is a need that needs to be fulfilled. Thankfully, our twin sons graduated college last year, made it through, no debt for them or for us, and that's a blessing. And so
Yes.
there really is, it really is wonderful to have people out there like you who can set families on the right course, make the right choices about how to fund their children's college education. Tell us a little bit about taming the high cost of college and what resources you offer there.
Okay. Yeah. So I've got a lot of resources for families that are just getting started all the way through kind of finishing up the college process. Now, what most of my materials focus on is what I would call late stage college planning.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you're a parent of a high school kid and you're trying to figure it all out. So, and to explain late stage, we can talk about early stage first. So early stage is, you've got a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, college is coming someday. Maybe we should save and invest or do something. But once you have a high school sophomore or junior, well, now it's real, right? It's like not college isn't someday, it's coming very quickly. And we really do need to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
We need to visit schools, figure out how to apply, figure out financial aid. Now, families that have done a great job of saving, if they have a big pile of money, it's like, well, how do they use it efficiently?
Mm-hmm.
But most families don't have a pile that's big enough because the cost of college has gone up so dramatically that, most families are trying to figure out, well, do I have to pay $80,000 per year to go to this school, or are there other options?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we focus, is on kind of the late stage college planning. And so if you're in that boat, especially, there's all kinds of resources on things like, well, what will college actually cost? And we've got the Scholarship Guide for Busy Parents, which is a video tutorial that helps families understand scholarships, because scholarships is a big piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And scholarships is also a little bit confusing because, scholarships mean different things in different situations.
Mm-hmm.
All the way from Coca-Cola and Bill Gates offering scholarships, all the way to the colleges that you're attending offering essentially a discount, but they call it a scholarship, so that you're not necessarily paying full price anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's a podcast where we provide all kinds of resources on how to plan and pay for college, where I talk to other experts, test prep experts and gap year and all the different things that can factor into that as well. So again, and there's, like I said, there's a number of different resources as well, and plus a blog and the podcast. So a wealth of information. Just go on over there. And then if you'd like, you can reach out directly to us through the website if you want to get even more in-depth information.
And tell us the website again.
It's tamingthehighcostofcollege.com.
Okay.
And that's also the name of the podcast. So if you're, most people don't go to the website for a podcast, you can certainly get Taming the High Cost of College wherever podcasts are sold, as they say.
Okay. So, suppose we have parents listening and they need to plan for college. How do they get started? Like, say their children are young.
Right. Well, I think if you're starting at the younger stages, it's really a decision around, should we save and invest now or later or never, as kind of the first question. Mm-hmm. And I think that has a lot to do with, what's important to your family and how much cash flow you have and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of cases, I think, putting money set aside specifically for college makes sense, but a lot of times it doesn't. Where, anyway, right now we've got 3 kids in daycare. It's crazy expensive. We really don't have any extra money right now.
Okay. Let's
put it off until daycare is over. Is that reasonable? Perhaps. Mm-hmm. But I think the other big thing that parents need to think about is, if education is important to you, you got to factor that in from an overall family budget, mm-hmm. right? Because what I see a lot is parents of 17 and 18-year-olds that are coming to me saying, hey, can you help me with this problem? And they essentially say, well, what's important? Well, number one, we want to be able to retire. And number two, we want to pay for college without taking on a lot of debt and all that other stuff. Mm-hmm. But then when you actually look at their finances, where's all their money going? Well, it's going everywhere except retirement and college. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of families kind of learn how to spend it before they learn how to save it. And they don't understand that college is going to be challenging. It's not unusual today for me to say, well, to make this college plan work, we need $3,000 a month for the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. And parents look at me like, oh my God,
where am I going to get that?
Right, exactly. But oftentimes these same families are earning, 10, 15, 20,000 a month. They're doing reasonably well. So it's not like they don't have it. It's just they've already committed it because they've got a large mortgage payment and they've got all the kids are involved in all these activities and they take vacations. And so again, they've learned all these things that they committed to before they committed to education and before, and again, sometimes retirement as well. So I think that's the important part of early stage planning, is if you think you want, as a parent, want to, pay for expensive education, then you might consider not buying new cars as often, or buy lesser cars, or have, commit to a smaller house than what maybe the bank says you can afford, because you need to put money aside for education as well. So I think that's the kind of the big piece as you're younger. And then whether you save money directly for college or you just save money in general, which is where I start with a lot of families, is if you're relatively young, just save in any type of account that's appropriate, do your overall financial planning, and then you can adjust later when college becomes real. Because I think, I have a tough time with a parent of a 2-year-old. Is the current college system going to be the same when your 2-year-old gets there? I don't know. We've seen a lot of disruption in a lot of other areas. We haven't seen it in education yet, but right. I think and I've been saying this for years, I think it's coming someday, where there's going to be other options besides the, just the 4-year degree. And we see it a lot in adult education already. In adult education, there's online programs, there's hybrid programs where some of it's online and some of it isn't. There's going to, to the colleges themselves. There's certificates and other types of education. And I think that's coming. But I also think there's always going to be that market of the 4-year degree, go off to a nice campus somewhere, do some learning, do some growing up. I mean, and why is it going to still be there? Because we as parents did that, or maybe we didn't, but either way, we want our kids a shot at that. And that's the challenge, right? They've been raising those prices for that type of education. But parents have said, well, we're going to do what it takes to make it happen. So even though it's more and more expensive and it's getting harder to do it, most parents have said, well, we're going to go ahead and commit to it anyway and make it happen.
Right.
So I think that's, what we're up against here as far as the process.
Right. And I just wish, I just don't know why college has just, the cost of college has just gone up so exponentially. I mean, to the extent that it has. I mean, certainly over time, things get more expensive, but it's really outpaces, many other pursuits and many other industries in society. So I really wish that could stop. I don't know.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that's anywhere in sight, but
right.
We'll be right back after this. You love your kids. You do your very best for them. But sometimes it feels like it's just not enough. And you're so sure you're the only one who feels this way. The truth is, you're not alone. It is also true that there are some things you're doing quite right. And there's a community who would love to exchange ideas with you. I'm Carol Maletta, creator of the Parenting 411, a portal for parents where I share information parents need through webinars and masterclasses. And not only that, the parents there support each other on this amazing journey in the Parenting 411 community group on Facebook. I can't wait to meet you in the community. And we're back with the Parenting 411. So, what are some of the top strategies that you recommend in terms of saving?
Yeah. So again, there's all the different investment vehicles that families can use. But again, if you think of it broadly, maybe families can start thinking about, well, maybe we're going to try and save a third, pay for a third while it's happening, and then take loans or some other ways to bridge the gap for another third. Okay. The average state school right now costs about $27,000 all in. So that's tuition, room and board, books, fees, beer, and pizza. So that's, again, the whole cost. There's a little bit of spending money in there, and then so the actual bill might be more like on average about 24,000. Now, some states are quite a bit more than that, up to 30 and 35,000, and some states are a little lower than that at 22, 24, or something like that. So if in round numbers, if a family needed to have $100,000 in today, if you had an 18-year-old today going off to college, now the students generally can borrow $5,500, then $6,500 and $7,500 in their own name. So for a lot of families, that makes sense. The interest rate's reasonable. It's not a huge amount of debt. When they come out, they might owe a payment of $325 or $350. Depending on the interest rates at the time, something like that. So it's not, theoretically you should get, with a college education, you should be able to earn enough to cover that relatively easily. On top of that, the students can work summers and weekends, and maybe they can also earn another, so now they can cover 10 of the 25 for the year between the loans and the work. So now the parents need to raise 15 for a state school. Right. So if they, show up with 30 already saved or 40 already saved, and they're in a good spot. If not, then the parents can borrow the balance.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens also is you start shopping around and you say, well, yeah, that's the average state school, but what if I want to go to the private school?
Right.
Right now, their list price goes, typically, I think the average is about 58,000 now,
Mm-hmm.
but their average discount, the scholarship that we talked briefly about earlier, is about 20,000.
Mm.
So yes, they have a higher price, but they also have much more scholarships. So their net cost isn't always, double or triple what a state school is. In a lot of cases, it might be cost competitive for the right
Mm-hmm.
students to look at a private school,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it'll be a little bit more. So what we often see is something, well, you can go to the private school for 28,000. Excuse me, you can go to the state school for 28,000, or you can go to the private school for a similar price of 28, or maybe it's 32, or maybe it's 45, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's 75, depending on the school. And that's where people get very confused
Mm-hmm.
of, yes, there are some schools and some situations where they'll ask you to pay full price, and you can always say no, right? Just because
Exactly.
Harvard says we cost 85,000 doesn't mean you have to pay it. You can choose to go somewhere else. But I think a lot of families don't know what it's actually going to cost, and they don't really understand the process. So they kind of fumble through it. And that's where the resources on my website, we've got another thing called the College Money Report, will help you estimate what colleges will actually cost based on your financial situation and your academics to some extent.
Well, right. And I was going to mention too, of course, families can save money too if your child does well in school and can take some advanced courses, AP courses, IB, whatever. Sometimes they're courses that they can opt out of once they get to school. So that saves a little time and money for them. And then, of course, merit scholarships. So based on their academic performance. So that's a big help. I mean, we definitely, both of our sons had that working in their favor as well. So
right, absolutely. And the merit scholarships, again, at the more expensive privates, are often pretty substantial.
yes.
So again, the $65,000 school with a $30,000 merit scholarship,
Mm-hmm.
now net 35, is relatively close to the $28,000 state school, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And then for families that show a need, on top of that, you might also get some Pell Grants, you might get some state grants. What we see that's pretty common in a lot of states is they've been raising their state prices pretty
Mm-hmm.
steadily, just like the privates have been going up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the state budgets generally, the state budget isn't willing to pay as much as it used to.
Mm-hmm.
So more of it's being pushed onto the students and parents. But to offset that a little bit, a lot of the states now are, for students that need help, they're providing some additional resources. So they raise the price, but then they enact a scholarship program that allows you to get a $5,000 scholarship. Sometimes it's merit, sometimes it's need.
Mm-hmm.
But again, just another way for them to collect funds from people that can afford it, and then give discounts to people that either earn it and or need it based on their financial situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I've heard you talk about how parents are often surprised that the price the college that they see on the website is not actually what they're going to pay. So talk about that disparity.
Right, exactly. And that's the overall discount that we've just been talking about, where, again, a lot of private schools know that they can't get the full 65 when you've got state and local options or other private schools that are going to come in at 30. So they're willing to compete with each other and with the state schools to some extent, right? If you go to Harvard or some high priced, high prestige school, you say, well, I can go to the local community college and it costs a lot less. They're going to say, yes, that's true, but it's not Harvard. So that's not a fair comparison.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But if you said to, Marquette here in my town, a similar Jesuit school, say Loyola in Chicago, is coming in at a better price, that that's a fair comparison potentially. And they might compete, they might not. Really depends on the school and how badly the school wants your particular student. And I think that's the other black box that families need to understand.
Well, I was wondering about in the other direction, though. Is it like, are there some additional costs they need to be factoring in beyond what they're seeing on the website? I was wondering if there are any surprises there.
Well, yes. I mean, certainly when they talk about things like room and board, that's average room and board. If you choose to go to the shiny new dorm and take the single room, it could be substantially more than what the average published number is, as an example. And then, of course, families can always spend more, right? I mean, if you're willing, when you move off campus, you can do it like I did it. We rented a tiny little house, 6 of us. I think my rent was $700 a month, divided 6 ways. And again, that was a long time ago. But it's doable, in that situation. I've been there. I was there recently, and that house still stands, and it still looks like it's got students in it. So I don't know what the current rent is, but certainly not that low anymore. But the point being, if you look for ways to keep your costs down, you can. And I think that's in kind of a situation that might make it go the other way. Is a lot of times the costs that the school charges for room and board are substantially higher than what you may be able to do once you move out and are willing to cook your own food and do some of that kind of stuff.
And that's the big variable right there. Willing to cook your own food and cook healthy food.
Right.
That's what parents are going to be concerned about.
Right. Exactly. So there's a lot of variables for most families. Just getting started with understanding how the basics work before you even worry about the variability of, well, yes, it's going to vary a little bit by dorm. It's going to vary a little bit. There's like personal expenses too. I mean, there's part of the cost of education in the official methodology that the government uses has $2,000 or $3,000 of personal expenses, typically, maybe up to 4 or 5 at some schools. That's to cover things like cell phones and laundry and dates and pizza on a Friday night and whatever else. And a lot of that's already being covered, right? You've been doing that for years with your kids. You've been paying for their cell phone. You've been doing their laundry and paying for the laundry soap and, all that stuff. So that's not maybe an extra expense. It's just a shift. Our family budget at home is going to shrink because we don't have as many eaters at home. And instead, we're going to spend more, obviously, on paying for dorm food and that kind of stuff.
Now, you talk about some good ideas earlier on about sacrifices and trade-offs that families can make to save money or to position themselves to, shoulder this major financial burden when the time comes. Are there other things that we didn't talk about that you've seen parents do or heard that they've been doing, and they really should avoid it when it comes to financing their children's college education, and how can they avoid the pitfalls?
Right. So I think the number one thing is to really understand the process. As an example, right, the local state school is low cost, and I have parents say something like, well, we're only considering state schools because we can't afford to go to the other schools. But the reality is those other schools might actually be lower cost in some situations, and they might be crazy expensive in others. So understanding when and how it works. So I think every family needs to understand, as an example, Harvard and Stanford and University of Chicago and a lot of those very high-end schools, they don't offer any merit aid at all. So you can have an academic rock star, and they're not going to get any money. And if your family earns substantial, say 300,000, 400,000, you're likely to pay full price at Harvard. Now, if your student earns under 100,000 at Stanford just put out a press release saying that any family that earns 100,000 or less, automatic tuition $0, automatic room and board $0. So it's essentially free if your family earns $100,000. Well, that's a big swing. And again, a lot of people would say, well, Stanford looks like it costs 80 some thousand, whatever the number is.
Right.
We can't apply there because we can't afford it. And the reality is that would be the low cost option. And if you earn under 100,000. And if you're in between 100 and 200 or 300, it's probably going to be cost competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all well and good. But the real challenge, I think, for most families is how do you get accepted at Stanford? And it's extremely competitive. So that's the other reality is for a lot of families, if you apply to schools that you can just barely get accepted to,
Mm-hmm.
you're not likely to get a lot of merit aid, right? You're a below average student. Well, I mean, we'll take you, but if
Right.
you're average or above average, we'll take you and give you some scholarships.
Mm-hmm.
So students now have to say, do I want to go to the more prestigious school that is not going to give me a lot of aid, or go to a lesser school? And again, in my opinion, that's a complete misnomer. There is no better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
It's what is a good fit, both
Mm-hmm.
financial and academic and social.
Mm-hmm.
And U.S. News and World Reports or whoever else is doing the rankings has no idea what's good for your situation. They had a formula based on what they think is important.
Right.
Chances are your family won't think the same things are important, and therefore that ranking is not all that useful.
Yes. And, I think something else that people can consider too is your child going to be studying in a field that really does require a graduate degree? And so I see where some families make trade-offs of let's go to school in state for undergrad, solid school. No, it's not, not settling. You're not settling necessarily, but then shoot for some other higher tier school for graduate school. And certainly if you go to a school, like to your point about your academics and you being able to get in, not barely get in, but get in to that school and do well, then that may position you to earn a scholarship or earn a fellowship to graduate school or something like that. But I have seen where families have made that trade-off where they're going to put their money in med school or law school or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, right. And there's a very similar thing to the undergrad. The average starting teacher at this particular school district, they all make the same. They don't care where your degree came from. They don't care anything. A starting salary for a history teacher at this school district is X. And maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room, maybe not. But the fact that you went to a more expensive school or less expensive school or more prestigious or less probably doesn't matter. Maybe it would help you get the job, but it's not going to affect your pay almost for sure. Same thing with nurses. And then then just degrees in general. Where you go to school might help with your first job, but after that, in most situations, was what you did at the last few jobs or what you've done outside of school or in addition to school. The exception to that might be if you wanted to be a president of the United States someday, maybe you want to go to a prestigious school for two reasons. One is you kind of have to have that pedigree. And the other is you want to rub shoulders with a lot of other people that are going to be the movers and shakers of the future because you're going to need that network to get elected someday. But if you want to be a dentist here in this town where I live, the local dental school is just fine. It's not as prestigious as Harvard or whatever, but it will, again, when's the last time you've ever told anybody, well, based on where you went to school, I'm not willing to do business with you?
Right. No.
I mean, it just doesn't happen that way, right? I mean, nobody cares.
Right. And the thing of it is, I mean, particularly with like, say undergrad majors, pre-med majors, and even, some of the sciences and some of the others, schools have certain standards. There's certain requirements about what they're supposed to teach in those fields. And so going to a state school or whatever, you're still going to get those fundamentals. And as I said, you can put your money or shoot higher for graduate school or something if graduate school is the problem. I mean, not problem, it's the aspiration. And then as you said, like for education, there's certain things you have to pass a test and all of that. So as long as you do that, if you went to the state school and someone else went to the Ivy League, like you said, you're going to still get the same pay
Right.
coming out.
Exactly.
Coming out.
Yes,
So.
exactly. Now,
Mhm.
and that's all true. There is a little bit on argument going the other direction too, for sure.
Okay.
You know, some of the prestigious places you might want to work don't recruit at all colleges, as an example. Like
That's true.
Google, when they're looking for software engineers, they've got their favorites,
Mhm.
and they're generally a little more prestigious or a little more selective because Google's looking for the best and brightest, and they pay well.
Mhm.
So they may recruit at the higher end schools in general, not to
Mhm.
say that you couldn't get to Google some other path,
Right.
but you know, that's part of the research as well, is, you know, an engineering degree from, or a business degree from a higher reputation business school does have some merit in some situations.
Mhm.
As far as what you learn and what employers are looking for and that type of thing.
Mhm.
Because you know, there's a little bit of what's going on, especially at the high school level and lower, where no child left behind means lots of grade inflation, right? So the fact that somebody got a 3.2 GPA at a particular high school
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean that they can read anymore. I mean,
Mhm.
it's possible to get through high school, not know how to read and write or do basic math or any of those things
Mhm.
with the way the system works.
Mhm.
Therefore, a lot of employers would say, well, let's require people to have a degree.
Mhm.
And now there's the same problem is creeping into college
College.
degrees a little bit. Is some degrees you didn't do much and you got the piece of paper. Other degrees you worked really hard and had to learn a lot to get the piece of paper.
Mhm.
And employers are starting to, you know, pay attention a little bit to that.
Mhm.
You know, so
Mhm.
they're not necessarily, but they, again, they're pragmatic about it. Is if they could, if this person can do the job, great.
Right.
You know, that's what we're looking for.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and then we've, you know, so we've got those people that are going back to school and whatever that say, I need the piece of paper. I can't get the promotion without the piece of paper.
Mhm.
I don't want to learn anything. I don't care. I just, what is the cheapest, easiest way to get the piece of paper so I can go get the job? And that just doesn't make a lot of sense when you really think about it. It's like, well, why spend all that? Why is the employer requiring it? And why
Right.
is the worker chasing it? I mean,
Mhm.
it's a waste of time, right? And that's
Absolutely.
a change we've seen recently with, it's been hard to hire people. So as
Mhm.
an example, a lot of state administrations have come out and said, we're going to delete the must have a 4-year degree from these big long listed jobs where we've realized you don't probably need it. You know, equivalent experience and other things could be just, you know, just as good.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Um, so, and, but that pendulum swings back and forth, right? It's,
Mhm.
so far employers can say you have to have a degree and they're not being sued for discrimination or anything. So, and if they get enough applicants that have the degree, they don't need to worry about it. But now with things being tight, they're not getting enough applicants.
Mhm.
So now they're oftentimes deleting that requirement to open it
Mhm.
up to people that might have relevant experience or other things, but just not the degree.
Right. And there's still maybe many qualified people in that pool too. So that's good.
Absolutely.
That more people get an opportunity.
We'll be right back after this.
As the saying goes, mother's work is never done, except when it really is. I'm talking about my new book, Mother's Work, Pearls of Wisdom and Gems from My Journey. I share my transformation from an outmanned, overwhelmed mom of twin boys to a parenting strategist and consultant, and being honored as DC Mother of the Year by American Mothers Incorporated. In Mother's Work, I tell you about the 7 guideposts that kept me anchored as I weathered the peaks and valleys of motherhood. Grab your copy at carolmaletta.com/motherswork.
And we're back with the Parenting 411.
We talked a little bit about academic performance that may help with earning merit aid and scholarships and all of that. Are there other things families can do to maximize their eligibility for financial aid?
Right. So I think there's a couple ways to think about it. So the first thing you want to do is find a school that's at a decent price, a decent net price. So it could be the low cost state school where you don't get a lot of discounts, but it starts low to begin with, or it could be the more expensive schools with scholarships or other reasons that the cost come down. But then once you get to that low cost, then it's how do I pay that cost efficiently?
Mm.
So then we can start looking at various college savings plans. There's tax breaks for college that, where if you do this, you get that. You can work on need-based aid as an example, where, all right, maybe I can get a little more need-based aid if I do my finances this way instead of that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big change coming through in the way the FAFSA works
Mm-hmm.
and how the calculations work. So for families that have students starting in 2024 or beyond, it's going to be different than the way it was 2023 and prior.
Okay.
Now, if you've got, if your oldest kid is a sophomore right now, well, then you're only going to be on the new system and you don't really need to understand what the old system was.
Right.
But for parents that have some experience with the system, or counselors or other people that say, well, it used to work this way, now it's going to work that way. And I think one of the biggest changes is will be an opportunity for families to plan a little bit more around need-based aid.
Okay.
But they're going to have to do it early because, as an example, a 2024 graduate, which would be a junior right now,
Mm-hmm.
their first FAFSA is going to be based on the 2022 taxes. So if parents did something that they shouldn't have, let's say they tapped into a retirement plan and ended up making their income higher than they should have, or they didn't save into their retirement plan. They chose, or whatever it might be, or they saved in the wrong retirement plan. There's different things that they could have done in 2022 that's going to have an impact on their student. So, but 2022 is done and over with. There's no way we can fix it.
That's right.
So parents of juniors right now are kind of stuck. So who I'm really talking to now are the parents of freshmen and sophomores. Or if you have a freshman that's going to start in 2026, it's going to be based on 2024 taxes.
Why is that? Because I thought it was normally based on just the previous year.
Right. Well, and that was a change that came through about 6-ish years ago.
Okay.
It was based on prior year for a long time, but it was very difficult because you were having to fill out forms before your taxes were even done in some cases. So it was very hard for families to do it. So what they did is they moved it to the prior year. So now your taxes are done and it's easier to fill out the forms, but it's also now unfortunate that they're done and you can't change them.
Right.
If you don't like the answers. So most families don't understand how it works and they don't know what's good and what's bad. They've heard rumors about, well, if I have money in this type of account, they're going to count it against me.
Right.
Which may or may not be true, but it's a much bigger puzzle than that, because just because it counts against you doesn't automatically mean you're getting less aid because of it. Again, as an example, if you're going to the local state school, a lot of times you're not going to get any aid no matter what you do. So yes, money in an investment for $100,000 is counted against you, but you don't get any aid with the investment and you don't get any aid without the investment. So you could spend all kinds of time moving the investment and making it so it doesn't count against you, but your aid didn't change. So it was very futile to do that. On the flip side, other schools where the formula is very clear, like a Harvard or Yale or some of the high-end schools, it's, well, if you do this, you get benefits. So understanding when it makes sense to sharpen the pencil and when it makes sense to adjust your income is important. And then I think the other area that families need to focus on as well is overall tax planning, where there's a lot of tax breaks for college. And as an example, there's a cutoff for a decent tax break. If you're married, it cuts off between 160 and 180,000 of income. So if your family's on track to earn 182 while you have 2 kids in college, there's a $2,500 credit that you lose twice because you have 2 kids in college. If you could get your income from 180 down to 160, well, you get another $5,000 in credits. So I've
Mm.
seen situations where we put more money in retirement,
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when we do that, a lot of times we just took some of our college money, right? It's like we have 2 kids in college. We can't afford to take our cash flow and put it into retirement.
Right.
So then what we did is we borrowed the money back out of retirement and paid the bill anyway. But because we did it one way instead of the other, it saved us, 5 or 6,000 in taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did not just recommend RAID retirement to pay for college. If that's what you heard, that's not what I said. What I'm saying, as part of a bigger strategy for people that are already on track for retirement, sometimes you put even more in retirement
Mm-hmm.
and then play some games in order to, avoid taxes or make things better in some situation or another.
Right. And so you just brought up something that I know that a lot of parents worry about in terms of funding college, but they're worried about what happens to my retirement and maybe emergency funds. And, there could be an illness, unforeseen illness or anything like that. So what are some other common worries that families have as they see the college expenses looming large?
Right. I mean, I think a lot of families are worried about how to be fair and how to, make this work when you've got multiple kids. Because when you're rolling into it, let's say you've got a high school junior or senior that's looking at college now, but you also have a freshman and an 8th grader.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, the oldest is always the guinea pig for everything, which is right. It's like when it was potty training, we learned how to do it, and by the 3rd one, we we're really good at it by then. And then sometimes that's great, and then other times it's like, well, but the rules have changed, so what worked for one didn't work for the other. There's always that issue as well. But one of the questions that a lot of families have is, well, if my oldest wants to go and it's going to be relatively expensive, but we want to make it happen, am I now committing to spending that amount of money times all 3 kids? If I give one of them $50,000 more for college than I feel I can afford, do I have to give everybody $50,000 more? And I can't answer that question, right? That's the family politics side of things.
Sure.
But it's something to think about in the overall process of, kids are different. Some kids will thrive at, my oldest is our academic achiever. He did really well. And we ended up spending more money on his academics. He went to a private high school because he thrived and it was a great fit for him.
Mm-hmm.
The next student I had looked at how hard his big brother was working and said, I want none of that. Right. I don't want all that homework. I don't want it. And he went to the local public school with his friends and he was very happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Do I owe him money because I didn't send him to a private high school? I mean, that's some parents would say yes, some parents would say no. But I think this is a discussion that parents need to have as you're rolling into the college process, not after it's all done and said, oh, because what happens if you work hard at it, you can get an inkling of, oh, these types of schools will cost about that much, and these types of schools will cost about that much, and these are the ones we're going to apply to and see how it goes. And then occasionally you'll have some schools in there. It's like, well, these we don't really know.
Right.
So you have one option is say, well, then we're not going to apply to them because they could come in at 80,000 and then we don't want to pay 80. Or you could talk with the student and say, we can apply, but here's the rules. If they come in at, substantially more than all the rest, then we're going to say no to those schools. But don't fall in love with them. Now that's easier said than done.
Yes.
But what I see a lot on the back end is we got accepted to these 3 or 4 schools and they're all expensive. What do we do? Well, you write a big check because it's too late usually to go back and find a school at a better price. Not always. Sometimes you can find, or you'd use a gap year or, but you painted yourself into a corner that you could have avoided had you planned but better. Then there's the situation of, these 3 schools are reasonable, but the one we really like is crazy expensive. And it's like, well, do you like it 30,000 times 4 years more than these other schools? Is it worth $120,000 because you like it?
Right.
And my caution there is if you're going to give up the lake home so that you can spend crazy amounts on college, great. But if you're going to blow up your retirement or go into bankruptcy because you're spending crazy money on college, that's a completely different decision, right? There's many families out there that have extra funds, and they're going to spend it on family vacations. They're going to spend it on education. They're going to spend it on expensive cars. They're going to spend it on Vegas. They're going to spend it on something. And if they choose education, great. That's why they earned it.
An investment.
Like I said, for other families, it's, probably should stay away from it, because either they're going to come out crazy debt or other situations. And if there's options usually.
Yes, I absolutely have heard of parents, sometimes single parents, borrowing 6-figure debt.
Right.
And it's just, I mean, and they have to retire. I mean, it's just, so they just have to keep working because they're not quite ready for retirement when they should be. So,
right.
Yes. So, tell our listeners where they can, again, learn more about you, whether you prefer your website or you prefer that they go to the podcast. Let's remind them where they can learn more about you and your work.
Yeah. So everything, again, is tamingthehighcostofcollege.com is the website with all the resources. If you want to reach out to me directly, there's a phone number there. You can schedule an appointment, or again, just take advantage of all the resources. And then the podcast is by the same name, and it's available in Stitcher and Spotify and everywhere else. And that's Taming the High Cost of College as well. Okay.
Is that our new episodes released every week?
I'm not that diligent, unfortunately. So every other week-ish right now. I'm trying to get back into it, but as things are breaking, and I was very diligent for a while, but recently I've been working on a couple other things. So I do it more in a seasonal type thing where we'll drop a batch here and there as far as the late breaking and so forth. And I do have a very good newsletter as well. So that's another place where people can sign up for the newsletter. We've got a number of things that go out as the seasons, this is financial aid season. Here's what you should be thinking about. This is visit season. Here's what you should be thinking about, type stuff that happens throughout the year, as well as just some ongoing reminders around, all the different pieces of the puzzle.
Well, wonderful. And to all of our listeners, I hope you will take advantage of the newsletter and head on over to all of your, one of your favorite podcast platforms and check out the podcast, because I'm sure he has a batch of episodes, plenty of them that you can listen to on your way back and forth to work, or whenever you have to drive, to soak up all of the knowledge that he has to share with you. And so I thank you all for listening. And I wanted to tell you that as we're heading into the Mother's Day season of celebration, I want to encourage you to grab a free copy of my book, Mother's Work, Pearls of Wisdom and Gems for My Journey. You just have to cover shipping and handling. That's $10.97. But not only will you get the book, you would get a bonus webinar about communicating with your kids, along with a companion workbook that's entitled, Do You Hear Me? Staying Connected in the Chaos. Plus, you'll get an ebook filled with inspirational stories about parenting in the pandemic and beyond. All you have to do is visit www.mothersworkthebook.com. That's www.mothersworkthebook.com. As always, we want you to follow us at the Parenting 411 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And by all means, like and subscribe to this podcast and share with your friends. And finally, remember, it is never too late to be the parent you want to be.